Charles. And thank you for inviting me, one and all. You have to forgive me a little bit because, I had spent some time working with Dr. King. It's my first time here, so I'm very moved to be here. And I want to give you some quotes. First, I should tell you, I had 3 different occasions in which I worked with Dr. King. One was, and the first time I met him was at the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964, attempted to be seated at the Democratic Convention. Some of you remember that. And I was in the midst, I was working in the Senate as a young Senate aide, so I was trying to help, and got to know him just a bit then. And then thereafter, he was, and this is, I think, an important part of his legacy, which is remembered but not really remembered. He was not only a great, obviously, civil rights leader and moral leader, but he was an anti-war activist. And it was very difficult because the civil rights movement needed his support, and to challenge the war in Vietnam in 1967 meant that it would lose some support. And he was terribly disturbed by the bombings that had gone on and seeing what the children, particularly the children who were being napalmed in Vietnam. And so he broke and made the famous Riverside Church speech in which he challenged President Johnson on the Vietnam War, who he needed to help with civil rights. It was a very agonizing moment. And I was I was at Harvard at that time, and we started a project called Vietnam Summer. It was a summer project based on the analogy with the Mississippi Freedom Summer, where lots of kids went down to Mississippi for the summer. And this was a summer project to try to get the anti-war movement going. And his first effort, we recruited him. It wasn't hard to do, but this was his very first effort to actually try to do organizing against the war. And so I had that to do with him and introduced him at that event. I kind of launched that project. There's going to be a memorial in May at Harvard for that project to remind people of his anti-war, not just civil rights, but also his willingness to be courageous about the future in very difficult times. And then thereafter, I got to know him because, not well, I was never very close with him, but we began talking about economic strategies that might be of the kind we're going to talk about today. So that's background for someone who's never been to visit the memorial here, and very moved in it. So partly for that reason, and partly because some of you can find things in books and articles I've written, let me kind of stand back a bit and tell you how I think about where we are and why the things that folks in this room are doing. And I've talked to many of you and gotten a sense of what you're doing. We had a great lunch today with Charles and Dwayne and blocking the other name, bad at names. Why that may matter. My experience with talking about economics and economic projects and changing the system, if you like, is that most people, the real question not is how to do the nuts and bolts. You can find out about that. The real question people ask, actually don't want to ask it. They don't really ask it. It's the question down deep, though. Doesn't matter. Are we doing anything that's going to get anywhere? Are these tokens? Not tokenism, but maybe that too. And the question is, does this add up? Is it going to go anywhere? So the trends have been pretty bad. The long trends. So for instance, the top 1%, these are numbers everybody knows, have gone from 1%, from 10% of the income over the last 30 years to 20 to 24%, depends whose numbers you use. From 10 to 22 or 3, 4, depends on the numbers. That went up. That meant everyone else lost 10 or 12% of the income. The top 1% in the United States got virtually all of the economic increase of the economic system in the last 30 years. You just have to think about that. Tiny percent. 1% got virtually all the gains. That's a systemic problem. That's not just a political problem. That's not just a social problem. That's something generating economic power underneath that's altering those distributions. The top 400 people, this is another one you just have to let sit in your lap for a minute. The top 400 people, you could probably get them in this room, have more wealth in the United States today than the bottom 180 million people taken together. That's not just a political problem or an economic problem. That tells you there's something structurally, deeply wrong in the system. Numbers going up, not going down, and there are long trends. The book I wrote, which is out there, is really takes a look at long 30, 40-year trends, and it's very hard to find. There are one or two exceptions, but they are exceptions that are going in the right direction. They're going the wrong direction or not moving. So that tells you that we're living in a systemic crisis, not just a political crisis. And then the question is, what do you do about this? Is the most powerful economic system in the history of the world politically. Is there any way forward? So I'm not a utopian. I'm a historian and a political economist. And my sense is that, and I wouldn't have written this book if I hadn't thought about it for 30 or 40 years, give or take. Revolutions come and go in history. They're as common as grass.
Right.
Look at South Africa. Where's apartheid? Look at Soviet Union. What used to be the Soviet's gone. The American Revolution, a tiny group of people, farmers mainly, mostly farmers, tiny small business people, took on the biggest empire in the world. They won. So you never can tell. First, you just better be a little skeptical about the power relationships, even when there's big trends. So that's number one. Number two, I'm from Wisconsin, Racine, Wisconsin. You did your homework. Nobody did that well, but nobody follows me that far into the corners of Racine, Wisconsin, a little industrial town in the south. Thank you. I went to school when Senator Joe McCarthy was around. Joe McCarthy was terrible. Anybody who had said anything political that was progressive, they got knocked down. In Wisconsin, it was double and triple that, because that was his home state. They shot anything that moved politically. My teachers were frightened to even say anything. So if you had kind of sat in Wisconsin in the 1950s and you read the tea leaves, what you knew for sure, nothing could really change. And then the 60s exploded. That doesn't mean there's going to be an explosion. It doesn't mean there's going to be great change. It means that most of us kind of don't really want to let ourselves believe that here's the hard part, that we personally might be, this is a sermon, that we personally might be laying the groundwork for the next great transformation. I brought you some Martin Luther King quotes that people haven't heard. Well, maybe in this room they all know them. So let's start one. Because King was onto this. He knew what was going on, particularly as the Poor People's March began to have difficulties. And when you move from civil rights into economic matters, it got a lot harder. A lot harder. So, this is King. We are dealing with issues that cannot be solved without the nation undergoing a radical redistribution of economic power.
Yes.
That's number one. These are all from different occasions. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. The edifice needs restructuring. Number three, the good and just society is neither the thesis of capitalism nor the antithesis of communism, but a socially conscious democracy which reconciles the truths of individualism and collectivism. He was seeking for a different path explicitly. He even was willing to say in 1965, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all God's children. And one last one. Speaking to his staff, one member recalled, King, quote, asked us to turn off the tape recorder. He talked about what he called democratic socialism, and he said, I can't say this publicly, and if you say I said it, I'm not going to admit it. And he talked about the fact that he didn't believe that capitalism as it was constructed could meet the needs of poor people, and that we might need to look at with some kind of socialism, but some kind of democratic form, something different. So whatever about that word socialism, which is, by the way, a majority of the people under 30 now think, when you ask them about socialism in the polls versus capitalism, they slightly like the word socialism better. than capitalism. Very strange. The three polls have come out that way for younger people under 30. So that word is kind of lost because everybody calling Obama a socialist, and that it's kind of gone. But when he was talking about it, he wasn't looking for socialism in the classic side. He was looking for restructuring, systemic restructuring, something that was different. And those are some of the ideas about that tell you he understood, in my opinion, that we had to look deeper and think about bigger kinds of transformation than just poverty programs, hard as they are even to get going. We at the Democracy Collaborative have been struggling with the nitty-gritty of some of this for some time. And I know folks here have been struggling with it probably a lot longer than we have, many in the audience. But we've been looking at the simple question, is there any way to begin to democratize, in very real terms, practically, the ownership of wealth in the United States? So the most obvious and well-known one is a co-op. So can we build on American traditions to come up with something new that doesn't look like any of the old models, but is very democratic and deals with the power structure? And it turns out that if you look carefully, the United States is filled with incredible, very American examples that can be advanced now, and I'm going to come back to why I think they can really be advanced now, but they're out there and they are available to us as an incredible traditional kind of inheritance. So if you think about the co-ops, there are 130 million Americans who are involved in one or another kind of co-op. Most of it credit unions, a lot of it agricultural, but also many worker-owned and other kinds of consumer co-ops. There is a tradition to build on that is a very democratic, but it changes the ownership to one person, one vote. And it's very down-home American. Racine, Wisconsin's got its credit unions and farm co-ops right outside the door. My high school, we could walk into the farm fields, and there were co-ops, agricultural co-ops. There are 10 million Americans today who are members of worker-owned companies in the United States. Some good, some bad, but that's 3 million more people than are members of unions in the private sector. It isn't like we don't know how to do some of this stuff. It's out there. That if you take, it's kind of really odd to be particularly in the South, if you take the public utilities and you have a number of them that are owned by cities. And in fact, there are 2,000 of them in the United States. 2,000 socialist operations. The city owns the big power company rather than the power company owning it. In fact, if you add up all the co-ops that involved in electricity and the city-owned public utilities, 25% of American electricity today is done that way in a different restructured form. So there's a lot more out there like that. If you begin to look carefully, you can see models. 27 states have one or another program that helps people invest in, helps worker-owned companies in one way or another. Some of them very marginal, some more significant. There's a public bank in the state of North Dakota, a very conservative state. It's a public bank owned by the state, helps the farmers, helps small businessmen, helps the co-ops. There it is, very practical, very successful. There are lots and lots and lots of examples that are not abstract, that are on the ground and tell you that we know how to do certain things in the United States that we've been neglecting, and that it might be possible to draw on this tradition to begin to advance different ideas. So let me stand back just a little bit and give you some sense. Some of you heard about our project that we've been working out in Cleveland. Steve Dove is with our staff, did a huge, good part of the work out there with Ted Howard. That's the project in Cleveland. How many know about the Evergreen Co-ops? Some of you folks do. Well, for those of you who don't, this is in Cleveland today, in that neighborhood where there's 40% unemployment. There are major worker-owned cooperatives structured with a nonprofit corporation linking them together so they can't get up and go. They're designed to kind of rebuild more cooperatives. And there's a revolving fund so that if we make some money from some of the co-ops, they start a new one. And the idea is not just to make some people rich or okay, but to rebuild the neighborhood through some democratic form based on very community and American ideas. The most recent one, there are three on the ground now, and they hope to have one or two a year from here on out as they keep building out. The most recent one got a lot of publicity lately. It opened up, what is it, about 4 weeks ago, Steve? About 4 weeks ago. It is the largest urban greenhouse in the United States. 3.25 acres, under worker co-op. 3.25 acres, a kind of complex structure. It produces 3 million heads of lettuce a year. That's every day. They plant 26,000 heads every single day. And that's out there. It's one of the most advanced in the country, and it's a worker co-op. You can do that. There's a very large-scale, industrial-scale laundry there operating too, in Evergreen Laundry, and a solar installation company as well. So these things are on the ground and developing. In many other cities, you have, this city itself is beginning to explore. You got Lettuce Works is on the ground, and I heard 2 or 3 more are coming in. They are beginning to happen in places like Amarillo, Texas, Pittsburgh. We have inquiries from something like 20 very serious cities want to do something like that. My Ted Howard estimates that maybe there's 100 cities that are looking at it and thinking about it. And one of the features of it that advances the ball just a little bit, and that's the name of the game, to move from these examples to move the ball forward, is that the purchasing power, this is a city where you guys are doing some of this but could do a huge amount more, of large institutions that happen to have a lot of public dollars in them, taxpayer money, like universities and hospitals, particularly nonprofit hospitals, Medicare, Medicaid, all that money comes from taxpayers. They buy a lot of things. They could buy a lot of things from co-ops and rebuild the community, not just the co-op, but this concept of rebuilding the community. In Cleveland, the neighborhood I'm talking about, the neighborhood has literally the 3 huge institutes, Cleveland Clinic, University Hospital, and Case Western Reserve University. Those 3 together, there, Rod, those 3 together purchase roughly $3 billion in goods and services a year. That's leaving aside salaries and wages, that's more. And construction, that's more. Up until recently, this is the same situation in your town too. Up until recently, they didn't buy anything from the area. Now they're beginning to say, why don't we use this purchasing stream to reinforce different form of ownership, democratized, co-ops, Dr. King, different form, and rebuild the community. Why don't we start buying from these folks? And why don't we begin to build up a model that is very American, unusual. We're already spending the money, taxpayer money. We could actually recycle it and rebuild the community. That's going on. Many parts of the country. It's going on here. You guys are well into that process. You begin to see, and I could go on talking about this longer than you want to hear me, but you begin to see the elements of a different design. Let me say that again. If we're facing a structural systemic problem, which as Dr. King says, you need to restructure it. And if it isn't going to look like corporate capitalism or state socialism, it's going to be something new. And if it's going to be democratic ownership, it's going to be democratic. And if it's going to be American, it's going to be building on what we have in common that we can develop. So these models that you're beginning to see proliferate offer the beginning suggestions, community by community by community by community by community by community, of laying some groundwork, possibly for a very different vision. Now, because I'm a historian, because I've been worked in Washington politics, and because I'm a political economist, I am not naive. Been there, done that. It is very hard to go beyond projectism. It is very hard to go beyond little projects. On the other hand, sometimes the conditions on the one hand permit, and on the other hand people respond to do unusual things if things may allow that. What I argue in the book, and we look at all the things that are exploding around the country, is that the emerging context into which we, talking to the person in your chair, in which we are living, I believe is one that is likely to force this kind of question into everybody's life all around the country more and more and more. And the reason I say that is I think the reasons to believe that the country is going through long-term stagnation, not a collapse, probably won't collapse like it did in the 1930s, because the government was about 11% in 1929. It's 33% now. So we might go down and bobble, but we probably won't have this big collapse. But we're also not getting the reforms. You can't get anything through Washington. And you're not likely to, in my opinion, wearing my Senate aides hat, the days when we could actually pass serious legislation of a significant kind, with one or two odd exceptions, we can come back to that if we have time, really depended, in all of the advanced industrial countries, including our own, you had to have a strong labor movement to get muscle behind the Democratic Party. That's how it was done. And we know that kind of a gut feeling or experience. Study after study after study shows that progressive politics has so far depended upon that. And the labor unions, the labor movement is decaying. It was at its height 34.5% of the labor force. It's now down to roughly 11%, less than 7% in the private sector, and it's going down. So that's a very strange thing. Think about this. This is really a hard one, but it has implications. A system that needs restructuring. Dr. King was right, in my opinion. Not just politics. When I say that, I'm for passing whatever we can get through the House, the Senate, whatever we can get. I'll take whatever they'll give us. But basically, the trends are not likely to change without really fundamental change. But a system that doesn't collapse, but it doesn't reform. Doesn't collapse, doesn't reform. It just decays and decays. And maybe decays some more. That's very general, but I think that's the most likely way of looking. Maybe we'll get a little pop-up here and a little pop-up down, but by and large, those long trends, in my opinion, are not likely to change. That's kind of, I lay out the argument more in detail in the book. People are in the situation that either we go a new way or it gets worse. Here, locally, now. We try to do what we can in politics, try to do what we can in Washington, elect the right guy, I'm glad Obama's in office, etc. But if you want to deal with the trends, here, now, locally, how do we start to rebuild? It's only that, to me, that's the lesson of the Civil Rights Movement. That's the lesson of the bus fight for a year, walking those walks before they actually got the bus to change. People got to sit where they wanted to sit. That's the lesson of, cities all over the country where, particularly in the South, nothing could change. I'm old enough to, I look older than that, I look younger than I am. I'm old enough to know about going in the South in the 1950s. A lot of people in this room know better than I do, of course. And nothing could change, people believed. And then people somehow found a way, and starting where they were. So just possibly, and this is a suggestion, in a context, and I do want to keep raising this issue of the larger trends and history, just possibly we may be seeing the elements of a new possibility being developed on the ground in cities like Cleveland, in Atlanta already now, that begins to suggest a different kind of overall large vision as time goes on. Now, that is hard to actually grasp. So, just take a second. You don't really believe that, do you? Person in your seat, standing where I am, that we are personally confronted with the possibility that what we do now here is part and parcel of laying the groundwork for a possible transformation. That all these models, these smaller models, some bigger, the experimental work is in fact not just good projects. We need good projects. But in much larger sense, if you look down this 30-year possibility, we may be actually learning enough developing enough, creating enough strategy, creating enough knowledge, figuring out how to handle a difficult situation with the business community context here, and laying down a different vision that is restructuring, changes who gets to own of everything in a democratic way. And it doesn't look like any of the old models. Doesn't look like corporate capitalism states, so it's going to be American. That we have that possibility. I think we do. And I know the word possibility is the word to underline. Nonetheless, if there is a possibility, the ball's in our court, and it becomes even more interesting to think about it in a very different way. So that's one additional way to kind of get at this subject. The steel workers in that town said, we've got to do something. And then the ecumenical coalition, big part of this got to be the ecumenical coalition, said we got to get to work with the steel workers because if this goes down, the town's going to go down too. And besides, it's totally immoral to throw people out, to throw their lives away. So they got together and they said, why don't we take it over and make it a worker community steel mill? Why don't we run this darn thing? And they got the Carter administration to finance a very sophisticated study. You better do a sophisticated study if you want to mess with this. Don't fool around unless you're serious. And the study said if you did this, X, Y, Z, there's a new technologies and so forth, invest in it. And indeed, this model is business. This is a business proof, a good model. It will go. You just have to find the capital to do it. Just the capital to do it. They got the Carter administration because they were good about politics. They were not naive. They organized the religious coalition nationally. They organized the state of Ohio. They brought the pressure to bear, and they got the Carter administration to commit 200, some say 100, but I think it was 200 million in my recollection, in loan guarantees to do their plan. Plan was developed by the best steel experts in the country they hired with the money they had. And then after the election in 1978, the money sort of disappeared. Two things happened. One, these folks knew that could happen. They were not naive. And they continued to do their political education work. And they said, if even if this goes down, we're going to put a new idea on the map. We're going to start laying groundwork for something elsewhere. So they were very sophisticated about it and very intelligent nationally and locally. And now in Ohio, you find hundreds and hundreds of worker-owned companies. Maybe not, we don't know about the concentration. Probably a couple smaller states have more per capita. And if you look at the people in the trajectory over 30 years, the people who did Youngstown, who learned from Youngstown, didn't do it. They were inspired by it, some of them, were the people who showed up in Cleveland to figure out how you actually do worker-owned companies when the situation was right. The late John Logue, a good friend of mine, set up a little center at his college to help worker-owned companies. And then John was involved in helping design the design. So you see these things from my perspective as a historian, and I'm proposing also, if you want to do the kind of things that I know people in this room want to do and are doing, to think of them historically. The evolutionary path is the one to keep your eye on, not whether you win this battle or lose this battle, but whether or not we're building something that it can evolve and expand and grow forward. So the model that you see in Cleveland, that didn't just pop out of midair. There's a history that people actually did things to lay groundwork, to begin to develop, to create, and that's more sophisticated idea, and that somebody's going to come up with a more sophisticated idea than Cleveland if we keep going. That we're building over time is the message. So that's part and parcel of it in the Cleveland area. And here's another piece of it. In 1977, so if you think I'm trying to suggest, stand back and think not just of projects, but how we share what then must we do in a larger historical frame. In 1977, the United Steelworkers Union was totally against these workers in Cleveland setting up for shop in a small worker-owned company. First, they didn't like the idea. Secondly, they thought those guys are upstarts, they're going to challenge the national leadership. And it is probable that they went, no one can prove this, but I was in Washington involved with all this. I happened to be the guy who did the planning for that Youngstown model at that time. So they called me in to help with the expert studies and oversee it. If you look closely, we think that the union almost certainly went to Washington, the Carter administration said, kill this thing. Don't help those guys. Union, killing its own members. They certainly were public against it all the time, gave us a hard time. I tell you that story because the issue that's interesting about it is there's also evolution in the labor movement, parts of it. The steel workers today are the biggest proponent of worker-owned companies. So let me give it another way. My heroes, I wrote this in the introduction to one of my previous books, my heroes are the civil rights workers in Mississippi and states like that in the 1930s and 40s. I got a lot of heroes beyond that. But the ones in the 1930s and 40s when tough times were going on, much tougher than most of us even care to think about, they knew what they were doing is laying the groundwork for the coming transformation in hard times. I think that's where we are, and our times aren't nearly as hard. That they had a sense that if we were to deal with big issues, big trends, you got to start someplace, and you have to see yourself in history as a person building through time in history, not just doing my project. You got to do your project. But the question of the project is always, can we open up a new dimension that allows us over time to create more and better ideas, to become transformative in our approach, to build alliances, to go forward in a way that gets beyond, including failure. Like those Youngstown workers. They succeeded. Look at Cleveland. They succeeded. And they lost. Do you get it? So, my last, if I say this is my last comment, don't believe me. You can never trust me when I say it's my last comment. But my last suggestion to you really is that if you look around the country, something, and I've been at this a long time, something's changed in the last 2-3 years, in particular in the last year. If you read the publications that I've been watching on this, or talk to younger people, the notion that we should build all kinds of co-ops, that's a leading edge idea, that was kind of a sidebar thing 2 years ago, 1 year ago. It is all over the country now. Young people everywhere saying, how do I build a co-op? And there's new books coming out, and there's papers coming out. That just popped in the last couple of years. Yes Magazine, for those of you who go online, Yes Magazine did a whole big issue on co-ops. The important point is not any one of these is important. Why is that happening? The pain levels are deepening. There are no standard options. People know that you either dig in and begin to build, or nothing's going to happen. And people are beginning slowly, I think, very slowly, to see that if we're going to get anywhere, we're going to have to change the economic system. And if we're going to change it, is to what? And if you don't like corporate capitalism, and you don't like state socialism, and you want it to be right from American roots, you better build on what we know and advance it and begin to learn and develop something that is real to our own traditions. So we never know, you never know about all this kind of stuff. That book is filled with lots of details and studies and statistics and numbers. It's also written, by the way, just a sidebar. I've been doing this stuff research-wise for a long time, and my friend Steve Dove gets mad at me because he does a lot of research that I use, and then I use it later. I'm doing a big book that's all filled with research. But I sat down last summer, and I said, it's time to write a book that people can read rather than an academic book. So for some reason, and I think the reason is the times they are a-changing, people can hear in a way they couldn't hear. That book is written, I wrote it in 3.5 months, just came right out. And people tell me it's readable and accessible. It was designed to be very accessible, and if you want the references, go to the back of the book. But the reason I wrote it that fast, I think, is because, not because of me, is because there's people out there who want to talk about this now. Do you know what a big deal that is? Do you know what a big deal it is when people actually want to talk about the kind of stuff we're talking about in this room with my little Martin Luther King references and my preaching style and all that? That's a huge deal when people begin to open themselves up, even partially, to a new vision. Maybe. So I take this time very seriously. I think this could be the most important. Now I say this, let me stand back. I'm a historian. I think this could be the most important period of American history, bar none. I think the system is running out of straight options. I don't think it's going to manage. We could have really ugly times. It could get violent, and it could go to some sort of corporate fascism. You know, dictators. Little violence. Guy who blew up Oklahoma City, 2 or 3 of those, and you can have people cracking down. But if you look to Latin America, by the way, that's not the end of history. Look at all those right-wing dictators who did all that, and they're gone. They're not around anymore. So we might even go through a bad period. We might not. But I think the options available to managing the system in the old ways are fading. And that the sort of things that are being explored may go nowhere. I'm cool. They may just help build a better progressive movement. Just help out. That's all. They may just help some poor people. That's all good. They might possibly, given the context of pain and stagnation and decay, they just might possibly be laying the groundwork for one of those big explosions that seems to happen out of nowhere. Civil rights, South Africa, Russia, Soviet Union collapsed. The British Empire got beaten. Feminism occurred, the biggest cultural revolution in modern history. Gay rights now. It is possible, the spring rising in the Middle East. It is possible that some point down the line, what people in this room that I know are doing may be establishing the preconditions for the next great transformation. I think that's possible. I think it's worth doing, and I'm delighted you invited me to talk about it. Thank you.
All right. Wasn't that wonderful? Yes. And we have more dialogue, so please, if you can stick around, do so. Nathaniel Smith is the Chief Equity Officer for the Partnership for Southern Equity. I've had the pleasure of knowing Nathaniel now for about five years or so, and I'm going to speak off the cuff here. He works at Emory University in the Community Partnership Department. He is known throughout metropolitan Atlanta for, I say, his community work, but really for his big heart and for his passion. Anyone who knows Nathaniel knows that he is committed to community, he's committed to equity, he's committed to fairness, and he's really committed to seeing our community, metropolitan Atlanta, improve and become the best that I think he thinks we can be. And so many fellows, I can't even go through all the fellowships this guy has. To be such a young man and has wonderful, and it speaks well for Atlanta and the type of leaders that we're producing. And so at this point, I'd like to bring Nathaniel up so you can moderate the next portion of our conversation. You know, I tell you, I think I'm going to put Charles in my suitcase next time I travel somewhere and have an opportunity to talk about the great work that we're all doing, not apart, but together, to push for a better community and a better region for everyone. And Gar, wherever you are, there you go. Thank you for thinking enough of Atlanta and the work that we are trying to do here. I don't think it's by happenstance that you are motivated by the work that happened here in the South. It's not by happenstance that the work that happened here in the South, that of course began before the Montgomery bus boycott, but really sparked during that time, created a new way of thinking about equality for America. And I think we still have work to do. And I think your faces are a prime example of the work that we have to do, and a manifestation of the individual, not only minds and the hearts that are committed to this work. Now, I have the honor of actually moderating a panel of incredible leaders, of women that are not only talking about, and I have to use this, Gar, when it's called flattery, I guess, or stealing. I don't know what you call it. But this conversation, number one, about context matters, not only about seeking a different path, but a systemic restructuring of the way that we do things. I think that is where we are, and these incredible women are moving forward in a way to build and create a new way forward. And so I thought that they would be great and a great additions to this conversation, providing their thoughts and hopefully some candid reflection on what they've heard from Gar today. I first want to, of course, invite Ms. Joyce Dorsey to sit here. Ms. Dorsey is the esteemed leader of the Fulton Atlanta Community Action Authority. Yes, ma'am. Joyce is an incredible leader and someone who has always been committed to the least of these. You cannot have a strong economic development agenda without the poor being a central part of it. You can't. And Joyce has tirelessly led this conversation in Atlanta for a long time about the poor and their role and their critical role in moving Atlanta forward. To not just be comfortable within the context of green space or parks or trees or heat islands, or even in terms of economic development, but to really understand the importance of the third E, which is equity, in this conversation if we're really serious about moving forward to create a more sustainable Atlanta. Again, Sustainable Atlanta brings together several organizations to do some incredible projects around true sustainability, and I thought she would be an excellent addition to the panel. So please give Suzanne a round of applause. And lastly, and certainly not least, Miss Deborah Scott, who serves as the director of Georgia Stand Up, a strong organization committed to the voices of everyday people, committed to ensuring that people are not just on the menu, but at the table, and has done some incredible work around the community benefits agreement work here in the city, and a great committed leader of building strong leaders for strong communities. Please give Deborah a round of applause. So now this is where the fun begins, and again, thank you for sticking around, because I think this is really where, PSC, we do a lot of work around transportation equity as well, where the train meets the tracks.
I'm going to read this book, and I want to thank Gar for the presentation, because what I already know has been confirmed in that we've got to do some things differently. About 15 years ago, I was approached by some people who are thinkers like you, Gar, who basically wanted us to help them start a co-op. And you're talking about people who I serve, who I may have to admit, I had no faith in participating in a plan such as that, to let people who were formerly and probably even presently unempowered make their own decisions using my money, and giving them the opportunity to build a corporation that they could sustain with their brains, decision making, and building it from the ground up. Well, it was unheard of. That's just not the paradigm that I was accustomed to. But then, of course, recently I've read Bob Lupton's book, When Helping Hurts. I think that's the name of it. And the destruction that we do when we create dependency.
My Lord.
I work for community action, it's no secret to most of you. And I would say that some of us are part of the problem, that we are sustaining ourselves when we do this type of work. And I make a pretty good living, but I serve people who are pitifully poor. And there's something wrong with that. I think that there needs to be a way to, really be honest about how do you take something that you have and teach it. Now, we start with our children, and it can work. So what have I learned from this? Take this up here and move it out the way and read some good books that tell you how to do it.
So, Deborah, we, so many great quotes from Gar. Again, I'm so appreciative of your willingness to come and spend time with us. You know, some pretty powerful quotes, and I thought about you with some of them. One in particular, seeking a different path, and the importance of Atlanta and our region seeking a different path when it comes down to creating opportunities for all. You know, we talked about the credit unions and the co-ops as an opportunity to create that level of wealth. But this question around the better distribution of wealth. Yeah. And not just from the perspective of taking from someone else and giving it to someone else. Because I think sometimes people get caught up in that someone's going to take from me and give to someone else. But it's really about our survival, right? Our survival as a region. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, first of all, for everybody for coming. I'm glad that we were able to co-sponsor this and pull it together at the last minute. So I see you mentioned in the book Oberlin, Ohio, and they're doing a cooperative there. And I've been to the Cleveland Cooperative and been very excited and interested about what they're doing. The model of the laundry is powerful. But the model of the greenhouse is even more powerful. I know I see Alicia Phillips here, and there's a move to do some of that work here, and we're certainly happy about that and willing to be a part of it. I guess I come from a standpoint of not just worker cooperatives, but also from a union family, and the notion of changing what was the norm and kind of redistributing not just the wealth, but the worker and the power of the worker, I think is the valuable piece. As we look at all of these development projects that are happening in the region, what we're looking at is who will benefit from them, not just who will benefit by going to the games or enjoying that facility later, but who's going to benefit in the creation of it, the concepts of creating those concepts, but also building it and then benefiting from it later. So the notion of community benefits, I see that you mentioned, but I'm curious about, and I thought we were going to ask him questions.
Well, he's going to come up.
So I'm really curious about the role of organizing, because I think that it just can't be top down and academicians saying that this is a good model. It has to be rooted from the soil and from the people, because if not, we'll end up with the revolution that you're talking about, and it won't look pretty if we don't empower our people every step of the way. So as we share spaces like this, our job is to go out and take the nuggets from these books and teach it to the streets, because we know that there's an underground economy out here. We know that, right? So how do we take those business skills and make them real businesses in our community? So I'm very excited to be here and very happy that this is, the birthplace of Martin Luther King is in Atlanta, but the civil rights movement, in my opinion, didn't really and I see, where's Brenda? Don't get me, Brenda, because she's SCLC. But I don't feel like it really happened here in Atlanta. So we went from workers' rights and civil rights and women's rights and now the rights of marriage. But where's the economic rights? And so when do we start that movement? So I'd like to say, let's start it here today.
Thank you. It's important to know the environment in which you're moving a progressive agenda in, and not assuming that what worked in one community may work in another. And by thinking through it, I think, it's very, very important to be understanding of that. Suzanne, you want to talk a little bit about that, about examples and how context is so important in moving and expanding this conversation?
Sure, thanks. I guess I'll stand up too. I'm not really short sitting there. Yeah. Well, first, before I dive into that too deeply, I want to touch on, I was very curious that Gar was speaking and talking about what are the different parts that can build the basis of that revolution. The thing that comes back to me again and again is leverage. And you look at metropolitan Atlanta, and we are overflowing in riches as a region. I mean, when you look at the assets that we have in this region, whether they're academic, corporate headquarters, sporting teams, foundations, community organizations, we have got this abundance. But it's not leveraged, it's not connected, and it tends to not be distributed to the benefit of all. And so, in my mind, part of the real challenge to us is to find where are those real pockets of asset and resource, and how do we find the levers that are starting to move them in the right direction in some areas, and put the weight on those levers. So I look at corporate sustainability, and you see this whole wave that is just overcome corporate America in terms of moving towards a sense of transparency and a sense of corporate reporting. And it wasn't necessarily because it was, the right thing to do. It was because your customers are demanding it, your clients are demanding it, your stakeholders are demanding it, your shareholders, your investors. These are all folks who are saying the way that you've done business in the past is not acceptable anymore, and we're going to exert some force in different places to shift that dynamic. I think where we see that there's some potential to tap into that in Atlanta is, again, you have all these corporate headquarters here. They're making great global commitments around sustainability. How are they applying those commitments here in Atlanta? So how are they carrying out those commitments here on the ground? And if you take it down, trickle it from there, you've got a corporation with great commitments. Where do those commitments fall out at a facility level? So a facility that's operating here in Metro Atlanta that's employing people, yes, they may be taking some steps to, look at some of their energy impacts, but, are they looking at some of the social indicators around sustainability? Are they looking at the disparity between the wage level of their shop floor versus their high executives? How are they starting to look at the way that they play a role as a corporate citizen in that community? So I think there's a lot of power there that I would love to see us tap into more. And I think the institutional power, it touches right on the whole issue around the cooperatives and the work that's bubbling here in Atlanta right now that I think is just ready to explode. That work can be fed by the institutions we have here that again, they have demands saying, okay, you need to have sustainability policies. You need to show us how you are applying sustainability throughout your supply chain. What does that mean? Where are you purchasing your food? Where are you purchasing your chemicals? Why can't we have manufacturers locally here in Atlanta that are providing the sources, the materials, the feedstocks for these institutions? So there's a lot of potential to build ecosystems around those big institutions. And then finally, I'll get to your question.
Thank you.
Around but I think it ties into this whole point of leverage. How do we leverage those assets at a community level around engaging people in part of this conversation and not seeing that sustainability is the tree huggers and the people that only care about the water and the parks, but it's caring about the people that are impacted by air quality issues, by water quality issues, by lack of access to healthy food, by lack of access to transportation. So how do we start to build a real movement of people throughout this region who aren't the tree huggers? They don't have time or energy, or it's not relevant to them. But you talk to them about their kids' asthma, or you talk to them about issues that are very relevant to them in their daily lives, and we change the conversation a bit, and we try to find ways that we can bring together a lot of different resources to sit under sort of the same tent and say, okay, you're providing this here, you're providing this there, you're providing this there. Can we look at this as sort of a big picture approach, and how can we all be a part of moving that needle collectively? So that's a lot of what we're trying to do.
Thank you. So for the sake of time, and this is definitely not church. We don't want to preach at you throughout the entire conversation, but what we did want to do now was provide an opportunity for dialogue. And Gar, if you don't mind coming up and having a seat next to these lovely women up here.
My pleasure.
I know, right? And want to make sure that we give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. I know you have a few burning questions that you may want to ask, and we want to be tight and crisp with your questions, please. No declarations. I'm pretty sure that if you're in here in this room that you're very intelligent and have your own opinion. But please, if you can get to the heart of the question as quickly as possible, we'll have a chance to lift up as many questions as possible. So please, first, yes. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. How are you? Thank you so much. My name is Latasha Brown, and I actually work in philanthropy. But before, I guess I have a question. I went to China a couple of years ago, and I was in Chengdu, and in the middle of Mao Square, and there was McDonald's and Prada and all of these shops, and my thought was, capitalism won. And I've been struggling with that even coming back here. And I guess a question for you would be, I'm not really clear about what the value proposition would be, because there's some shifts in terms of people, although I know that there are, particularly around the redistribution of wealth, there's some shifts. The church community has shifted tremendously from with their position on capitalism and even their position on poverty. Politically, you had a Democratic president who many of us like would not say poor in his speeches. There's been a shift in terms of the political wheel, where people are moving from collectivism in terms of just how our lifestyles were, to individualism. So I'm really interested at how do you see the value proposition of people moving towards a more collective economy or shift in the economy. It's almost where I see and I know you want to make it quick, but I just want to make this point. It's kind of like what I think is the lottery effect. Everybody plays the lottery because everybody thinks they can win. So everybody accepts the 1%, because the 99% of people actually think that one day I'm gonna be smart enough to be one of those. So that's why it works. So I'm just really interested in figuring out what is what do you see would be the shift for people with the way that things are going, the shift of people to really accept this whole idea of redistribution of wealth.
A small question. First, I do want to say that, to just respond to two things. I left out a whole ecological part of this. It really has, all the things that are going on in Cleveland are green, 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 and that needs to be part of it. And secondly, about the organizing question. The project in Cleveland is a top-down demonstration project. That's what it is. The next stage is clearly going to be organizers getting involved in making demands around the country. And that the whole thing's got to be developed. That's not where we are yet, and that's one step is important. You've got to do another 10 steps. I didn't use the word redistribution. I think there does need to be redistribution. But the idea of redistribution was, I mean, they've got the money, we're going to organize people, we're going to tax it and take it away. Taxes have gone down dramatically, from 91% down to the high 30s over time, you know, after the post-war period, and Eisenhower was in office. 91% for the top bracket. Now we're at 35, 37, depends who's in, you know, how it bobbles around there. Corporate taxes have gone about 7% of the GDP. They're now about 1.3. The trend, every place you look, these trends are decaying. I'm for as much as we can do in the old way to stabilize that. But I don't think that's going to get us there. I think that whole model depended upon strong labor movement, and that labor movement is not going to be strong. I think the decay and pain and rebuilding are going to suggest ideas for a new model, maybe. And that new model is inherently not redistributive, but inherently reorganizes, it builds a different vision of what ought to be. That these are steps in a context of growing pain, in a context where things are getting worse. And people are asking, what the hell's going on? Pardon my French. What's going on here? And models that are practical. Maybe there's a chance of going on. If you see Time magazine, their online edition, that isn't what it says. It says, was Karl Marx right? This last week. What's that about? Something's going on in the big trends, and we're getting all these funny things happening. The Academy of Management, 10,000 management experts who are all business-oriented guys who work for the big corporations, asked me to come and keynote their conference. Is capitalism in deep trouble? Is something ending? There are a lot of people who don't think that. They see the decay. Now, I don't think capitalism is going to drop away tomorrow. In the business community, I'm just citing this, go to the Academy of Management. Go read the paper that they said this is what our conference is about. It is mind-blowing.
Yes, sir.
If you were to meet somebody today who was structuring a profit-seeking enterprise, what would you say to them to convince them to look at going this new route rather than the traditional route that they're already aware of? What would you say?
You know, if the guy's or woman who's in the game to make as much money as possible, I don't think they should do this. a lot of people, we're talking about, you and I were talking about impact investors. The term impact investing, that means people who they got enough money from here to China, and they're not worried about themselves and their kids.
Problem is people who are engaged in this kind begin by the end to behave as owners. And as owners, they have their own behavior that can back maybe to the same. So how do we organize to really keep all these enterprises to not become just owners?
Culture of ownership. Good question. Next question.
I'd like to ask Gar and the three panelists, if Dr. King were alive today, what would he do and how would he handle what you have been talking about?
Thank you. What would King do? Yes, sir.
Right. I would like to ask Gar, right now, the cooperative movement, co-ops work well when you start from inception and you're starting a new project. How do we create shared prosperity with corporations and the existing entities that already have long-term structures? We're dealing with that now with the stadium, with a number of ventures. How do communities connect with these economic entities that are huge but already very mature?
So we'll start at the end and work our way up. Private community partnerships. What would King do within the context of our society today and the culture of ownership? How do you manage that? Whoever gave rapid fire. Anybody
Okay,
want to
well,
answer?
I'll go on the King. I think, and of course, I'd never met him, but I think that he would say that we really need to develop other leaders. That I think one of the fallacies of the civil rights movement is once he was assassinated, the leadership model shifted. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to grow leaders because we can't just be taken out one at a time. So leadership development and organizing.
Thank you.
Any comments on that?
I will tag on to that to say that I think he would look at the opportunities around some of these sort of seeds of organizing that are happening now. You look at divestment campaigns that are happening within corporate America and academic institutions right now around fossil fuels. I mean, it's just the tip of the iceberg, but that type of approach, going to leadership in very non-traditional kind of places to say, you have power over this institution, you have power to change the way that industry operates. I think he would see that seed as something to build on.
Joyce, what do you think?
Well, being a product of the civil rights movement and quite involved here in Atlanta, and Atlanta did do quite a bit. I think that we have to learn, or I have learned in my professional experience, to listen to the people who are out there experiencing what we are out here trying to help them to get over. And within them lies the answer to their own problem. And this thing called cooperative, I told you I was real guilty of not wanting to even hear that somebody who needed my help could tell me that they could set their own project up, run it, make money, and live. No, I came from the paradigm of helping them, give them the fish, and not teaching them how to take the rod out there and get it themselves. So if I were to bank on what Martin Luther King taught me, it was that we shall overcome, not just you, and not just because you're helping them, but you should plant the seed so that they can grow from there and take it over. And that to me is how we should be actualizing the dream.
Thank you.
Self-sufficiency, that's the word.
So, Gar, the question of private community partnerships, I know there's a lot written recently about that. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I want to address those other two
Okay.
questions if I could.
Please.
First, who knows what Dr. King would have, but I do believe, I believe two things. One, that we've got to really encourage and listen to what folks are, where they're at, and how they're acting and what they're on. And it's not just co-ops. There's a lot of other forms of ownership that ought to be developed, like land trusts and so. But they all have this idea of we're in it together, common ideas somehow. For instance, what I was talking with Dr. King about when we were talking about economic development, and shortly after Memphis, there was a big gathering in Memphis. I had to speak at that place, about 10th on the list. What we were talking about became the CDCs were very sophisticated in the 1960s. They didn't start out, a lot of CDCs are important, they do mainly housing and small business. But some of them were trying to do ownership. That was the model originally, and we drafted legislation that would have gone way out to a community-wide ownership, not only worker ownership. And so that was what we happened to be talking about when I was talking with him about economics and before the assassination. So I think he was moving in everything I've seen to that you cannot do it the old way. We've got to talk about big-time restructuring the system. I think that's where he was going and having understood that. And I think he was looking for an American way, and I don't think that he got it. So I do think it was listened, but also I think he was beginning to project a vision. Some of this was public statements, not as many, because I think it was very difficult at the time. So that's number one. I think that the issue is really important that this gentleman raised also. I'm a fan of worker-owned companies and co-ops, but worker-owned companies very often end up with workers' capitalism. They like my little piece of pie, and I don't forget about the rest of you. The model that we're talking about in Cleveland and many other places is a community-building model. We're all in it together, not just the workers. Workers are only 40, 50% of the population. There's a lot of old people, young people, sick people, who are the whole community as a structural reality. That's what this model looks like when you design the community, nonprofit corporation for the community. But I think the challenge, and nobody's done this, neither socialism nor capitalism ever cared about community. Neither one cared about community. They wanted to build state power, and other people wanted to make individuals and companies rich. The rebuilding of a moral community, what Dr. King called the beloved community, is a community, everybody all in this thing. And I think that's where the real challenge lies, to look at structures that actually get to that. I tried to talk a little bit about it in the book.
I agree.
So just the question, because I don't want to lose sight of the gentleman's question here about private community partnerships. Any comments about that from the body?
I think it's something that we have to learn. We probably know it, but we have not practiced it. And we need to study models that do work and begin some experimentation and see if it can demonstrate and grow.
So one last question, and thank you all for being patient. All right, one more after that. I know you've been patient. Thank you, my brother. Go ahead.
I'll be real brief. This is just, Gar, I mean, if I could, I think you're selling the redistribution thing a little short. Can I get a reaction from you on this one idea? I mean, you said that the way that redistribution would have to work is there has to be political pressure on political leaders, and that could only come from the labor movement, which is sort of defunct. So you've kind of given up on the idea that you can force redistribution through taxation because there's no more labor movement. Here's my suggestion. You don't need labor. What you need is populism. And you need people collectively working together. And what you've got is an alternative to capitalism. That's a populist movement, right? So the way you get to redistribution, ultimately, these things actually work together. They're not, you don't have to downplay one. This is the sequel to the labor movement. Right? So the way you get to the redistribution is by pushing this kind of populist movement. That's how you then outcompete the capitalists, and that's how you leverage redistribution. Is that too rosy? I mean,
Did you read my book? I was speaking too quickly. The traditional model of redistribution is that the labor has been behind social democratic and liberal politics, and you could tax. That model, I think, is over. But there may be a new model based on institutional. Not just politics. Politics without institutional power is bereft of real power. That's what labor gave. But it is conceivable that the kind of things we're talking here, if they build up over time, will establish new institutional power to go along with the new politics and to do some of the other things as well. That's down the line. Thanks for the clarification. Wealth is a critical ingredient in how you design systems. And power tends to follow wealth. Not totally spread, but often. And what we are talking about here is transforming the basis to a different broadening of the base in a way that builds community. So that is wealth ownership as a power base and as the basis of a moral society.
So to conclude our panel, I think there are some fundamental questions that we need to ask ourselves as co-laborers in this work. This question of social change versus systems change. Are we just focused on changing our society? Or are we fundamentally trying to shift the systems that create or limit opportunities for all? Are we really focused on equality? Or is the real question about equity? Understanding where people are and meeting people where they are and providing opportunities for all to play in this community and these chances for real growth and opportunity. The fundamental question that we also have to ask ourselves is Atlanta finally ready to fail forward?
Fail forward.
Is it finally ready to ask the hard questions and to go back and wonder were there any lessons learned from the mistakes of the past? Or we would continue to assume that we have all the answers, or the people that are invited to the important meetings are the ones that have all the answers, versus the truth, and that is the people in the community are the ones that have the true wisdom and have the true, as I have this podium here, to have a preaching moment, the real balm that will heal our ailing communities. So again, thank you all for coming. Thank you, panelists. We're going to close it out, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to moderate this panel. And Charles is going to close it out. Thank you, panelists.
Just three things before we leave here. One, definitely want to thank Georgia Stand Up for their support in this event, and their staff and leadership, as well as PSC. Couldn't do this without Kay. Thank you so much, Kay, for your leadership on this event. Thank you. Again, want to thank the panelists and our speaker today. I think just sensational, the information that was shared, and hopefully you gain from that. And then finally, we want you to stick around and for the book signing, because obviously there are books available, and Gar has graciously agreed to sign books. One other thing, we want to continue with this conversation, and so we want you to stay engaged with the work of Partnership for Southern Equity. We have an Equity for Opportunity Circle. We meet now every other month. Please, if you are not a part of that, you would like to be a part of it, go to our website. We're about shared prosperity. A lot of things that we've talked about here today, we want to make happen in the Atlanta community. And so, again, thank you for coming out, and good night.